Welcome to Mourning, a podcast where we share our experiences around letting go of grief and learn to move with grace through mourning. We are your hosts, Alyce Christina
and Crystal Lee, two friends who connected through yoga and movement and ultimately found a deeper connection over our own parental losses.
We share how our experiences have informed us to live our lives more authentically, boldly, and in the now so that you can do the same. We believe where there is pain, there is transformation.
From the loss of a loved one to change in a career, a heartbreak, identity shift, and many other forms of loss, we walk this path together.
To discover the light within the darkness, we recognize the joy within pain and invite you to dive in with us as we share in the hope, laughter, and lightness of the mourning journey.
Join us for stories, interviews, and conversations that connect us as we explore the universal experience of loss that invokes the becoming of one's true self.
Welcome back to Mourning Call. I'm Alyce.
And I'm Crystal. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a different type of loss unrelated to death. We are going to be talking about the loss of community, which can be, actual loss of community or even just a sense of loss if a community shifts, or a loss of identity around loss of community. So we'll be discussing just different ways in which we can lose community and sense of connection. So Alyce, I know we were chatting before we even jumped on. What are some of the different ways that you have experienced yourself or seen other people, lose a sense of community?
Yeah, so we'll dive into this first one deeper, but the most profound sense of community loss that I experienced was the closing of my home yoga studio in 2020, right before, or pretty much a month before my mom passed away. And in thinking about that, being in, reflection of how this shows up and how it's relatable to other people, just last week, my daughter graduated. I think I mentioned this on our last episode, graduated from 5th grade and she was fine. And then all of a sudden her gears switched after the ceremony and we were home and she was acting kind of bothered. And I was like, I know something's bothering you. Just, talk to me. It's fine. Tell me the truth. And and she finally did share that, that she was afraid, that she was leaving behind, the people that she's been with since 3rd grade and that she might never see some of those people again. So that really was, I was like, oh my gosh, we lose a sense of community when we have these life transitions from a very early age, whether it's we move states or we move schools or we transition from 5th to 6th grade and go to a new school, or 8th to 9th grade and go to a new school. And then, the biggest one is, in our young adult lives where we form a sense of community with our childhood friends, is then graduating from high school and moving on to college, which is again where, and potentially maybe the first time that we ever really have a conscious choice of who we're going to be in community with. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I think similarly, in adulthood, you move in adulthood and you can move in childhood, but in adulthood, so much of our identity is wrapped up in quote, what we do for a living or not, whether you are a creative or not, you likely have colleagues at work and hopefully you like them. A lot of people maybe don't like their colleagues, but if you are lucky enough to like the people that you work with, and if you change jobs, that is a community that I mean, you might keep in touch with them, but it certainly changes and shifts. And especially if you're in a creative industry, or even if you're just, you have a quote day job, and then at night you're in a choir that you practice with multiple times a week and you perform on the weekends or whatever it is, right? Um, Oftentimes you are so close knit with those types of creative communities or just work communities because you're kind of in the trenches together working towards a common goal that when, especially if it's like concert focused, whether you're in dance or singing or whatever, it's like kind of that one play or project or whatever is over, there is a sense of grief. Like you're like, oh my gosh, like this particular group may not ever perform together again, or this particular group on a project may never. I mean, and it sounds silly, like I don't want to compare that. It is a type of grief, 100%. So I'm not saying it's not a type of grief. I don't want to say it's like the same necessarily as like loss of a human being, but you certainly are losing a sense of self as you're transitioning away from whatever that was, you know?
In that moment, and I think that, even as you were speaking, it's like, oh my gosh, I like just had a flood of memories. In my dance career, I have worked very um, more concentrated in a um, project based as a independently contracted artist, right? And we spend, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks together, right, with a certain group of dancers. And when you're working so closely with one another, and then like the end comes, right, it's like maybe anywhere from like 2 to 6 performances. I mean, even with the over a week, in a week period, right? And you work so hard, and you create something that you're passionate about and that you love, and then it's like the last show comes, and it's just bittersweet because like you're physically exhausted. Yet, like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to potentially ever see these people. Like, there will not be this constellation of people ever again in this moment. I mean, thinking of like the 10 years that I guest artist as Arabian Princess for the Charlotte Youth Ballet here in Charlotte. And even though I had the same partner for that duration of time, I, you know, we only saw each other for a week to prepare for the 6 performances we did over one weekend, right? And then even with all the kids that are there, it's like the kids continue to age. Some come back, some don't. So every time you develop this, and it's an intense work period, and you develop this camaraderie of like being with each other. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I always said it was like, it was the kickoff to my holiday season, right? Like it was doing the Nutcracker. And it was also like, oh, what do you mean I don't get to do this for the rest of the month? Like it was just those 6 shows, and then we were done and it was gone. And I know we've talked about too, and that could be the same sense for people who are involved in sports, right? Like maybe they go on and do collegiate sports. And, my closest relationship is that too of my partner, who was a swimmer all through college. And then when he graduated, there was a bit of not only like a loss of identity, and there was a loss of community, like this brotherhood of people that he swam with for 4 years. And they supported each other and they uplifted each other through good and bad times. Like, and I think the parallel is that these are experiences of loss that need to be discussed, and it doesn't need, like, I feel a responsibility to prepare Amelia, for these experiences of loss, right? And that's one thing that I shared with her last week was it's completely normal, right? It's completely normal to have these feelings of sadness amongst this immense feeling of accomplishment and joy for, working so hard and for where she's gotten to. And even though she's leaving the community that has established her, has contributed to who she is as a young person, she also has an opportunity to then create even more meaningful connections, right? But it's going to continue to be an ebb and flow, right? And that's such an important lesson. I think that provides insight and tools for us to even then be able to approach the larger, more significant losses of life.
Exactly. That's what you're saying makes me think of the term that we use around, and again, I mean, obviously it can be applied here, but the term we use around death or even like a serious or any diagnosis, like the quote, the new normal, um, because it can be applied here. Like you're using the sports analogy, reminded me of my sister. She was a professional rugby player. She played soccer and like since she was a kid and college, and then went on to rugby and or all through high school, and then went on to rugby, and that was her identity. I mean, she was playing like internationally for the U.S. rugby team. She's freaking awesome, and the nature of the sport is you get so beat up physically, you retire somewhat early in your 30s. Um, and she really struggled with who she was. I mean, I think she still does after she retired. Like, who am I without not just the sport itself, but with my rugby community? I mean, she keeps up with plenty of those people, but it's not in the same context. And she really had to work to find, and probably still to this day, I don't want to speak for her, um, to like figure out what the new normal is. Who is she now outside of rugby? What does that look like? And I think that's something that's not talked about enough for, yeah, people in sports, or that, you have a career doing something and you get like a life-changing injury. Um, and to your point, back to what you were saying about Amelia, if we could talk about these, excuse me, if we could talk about these more in the sense of these other type of losses and changes, that when like a big loss, like a death, hits, again, it's not the same, but we might have some language around it, like a new normal. It's normal to feel these things, loss of sense of identity, whatever. It would make it maybe slightly easier.
Yeah. And or maybe just create ease in yourself of like trusting that that we're resilient, right? We're trusting our own resiliency in the face of trial, right? And um I've been seeing a lot of things around me that are invoking like the understanding that joy and sadness can coexist. And I think that is the understanding of the difference of grief and mourning, right? And I feel like we have discussed this in the past, and um, as a refresher, right? Like it was explained to me by one of my teachers, Suzanne Conrad, like grief is getting in the grave, right? Like when these transitions of life, these cycles of life are ever evolving, right? And we hit, whether you want to call it a crossroad or an ending, we have a choice, right? And the grief, like the weight of the the choice is to like, we can either get in the grave, we can like choose not to keep living, and we can like, on the other side of it, we can move into mourning, right? And choose to celebrate what was, right? To honor the past. And that doesn't go to say it's not hard, or we're not going to feel sad or maybe even angry about it or whatever it is. And we have a choice to invite in possibility, right, with how we move forward.
Yeah, and the possibility of the word I was thinking of is opportunity. Possibility is great because I actually was listening to another podcast where I can't even remember which one it was, but it was focused on so much when a big change happens, or like when there's an ending to something, a relationship, a career, or whatever. Obviously, we're going to grieve that, to your point. Like, but we don't. It's like there's so much focus on the, I guess I hate it, like the negative aspect of it, without saying like with every ending there is a beginning, and there's an opportunity for something new. We don't know what that is, which I think people are always afraid. Back to I think what we talked about in the last episode, that so many things are driven by fear, but we're afraid of this unknown that's in front of us, right? Like a chapter is closing, and it is normal and healthy to grieve that. And can we not, to your point, get in the grave? Can we equally like embrace the sadness, and also, it's like the other side of the coin, look at the opportunity of like the new space in front of us as like a good thing. Like the two things can exist at once. And it's like, how can we develop language around almost like the excitement of this new potential whatever's to come, right?
Absolutely.
But it's tricky. It's tricky because when you're in the sadness, it's hard to see out sometimes.
Absolutely.
Um,
I think that's why it's important, to identify the things, that restore us, like we talked about last time, right? That allow us to stay in that above the line perception of ourselves and impossibility, right? Um, Suzanne Conrad also says, we always have more than just two choices, right? And right, and I think you can relate that to, we're not black and white, right? We live in this range and variety of colors of our lives, and it is, and in that, right, it's not to say like life is hard. I took a dance class today, and the dance teacher said, life is hard and dance is harder. Right? Like, and and I was just like, yes, that's right. Because there's always going to be challenge regardless of what we do. And it's I do the hard things because I love what I do. Right. And the transition, whether they were like a conscious choice or something that happened to me, i I continue to remind myself like who I am in the moment, and who I am to like to keep moving forward.
yeah, it reminds me of the concept of like, quote, choose your hard. Like, just as it's hard to close a chapter, obviously it's sad. And it's also hard to like create a new identity or start fresh or like build a new community. It's not easy. Like you have to put yourself out there, meet new people, whatever, right? But typically at the there's typically a reward somewhere along the line. Like you're probably going to meet new people that hopefully find new friends. You might discover something about yourself that you didn't know in this like new identity. You're like, wow, like for example, this is a stupid one, but like I've started gardening during the pandemic, and I'm like, I used to kill plants, and somehow I've like figured out I mean, that's so silly, but I'm like, I didn't even know this part of me existed, right? So, um, you kind of unearthing something within yourself is hard also. So, but it's like there's usually something beautiful at the end of it. So it's like choose your heart. Do you want to get stuck in the old, or do you want to have an opportunity for possibility, right?
Absolutely. And with a little like little like coaching tidbit in there, like we create our realities, right? And when we constantly tell ourselves that shit is hard, guess what? It's probably going to be hard, right? And like that's why we keep like or at least like when it comes to physicality too, we continue to do the hard things to build the muscle endurance, to build the muscle memory. And then all of a sudden, after however long you do it, one day you realize that it's like not it's not as challenging as it used to be, right? And it becomes, right? So it is, even whether it's a thought of mind or something physically in the body, but we're going through these cycles in life that, it's the one consistent thing you can count on is change, right? And nothing staying the same. And so the more we accept, right, and practice moving through the way we transition and take on change, right? When change smacks us in the face, when we least expected, we have a quicker recovery time,
Yeah, it's true.
right?
Yeah,
Because it's because we've been practicing it, right? And I think that's the thing, at least for me, to get across, right? To share here in this conversation.
yeah, it's like flexing the muscle of flexibility, literally flexibility. Like if we become too rigid to a certain way, whether it's a good way or a bad way, it doesn't matter. Like we were like, I only do this, and I'm only this kind of person, and I can't be flexible outside of that. Um, Life, like you said, like there's going to be some kind of change there. So if you practice the flexibility to maybe be more malleable to those concepts, that you can be a different person, or things can change, it's not going to hit you so hard when something comes.
Yeah, and it may knock you down, and you have the ability and the choice to be like, oh, I can get up, right?
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that's a beautiful segue into the story of my, the significant loss I experienced, of community, of the home yoga studio that I practiced at, then worked at, then became an assistant uh, in the classroom, and then did teacher training, and then became a teacher and a program leader. And, my life lived and breathed this yoga studio. And
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask you about is, I mean, this is a studio that was a staple of the Charlotte community, um, for obviously teachers and people that worked there, but students that went there. So tell us more about just what happened. Yeah.
yeah, Yoga One, Charlotte, North Carolina, is a pillar of the community for over 10 years. Um, Close to 15. Maybe not quite at the 15-year mark. And we were there. We had at one point 3 different studios within the Charlotte area, throughout the Charlotte area. Um, there were various um, phases of Yoga One, and it was a very unique community, and I think the one thing that stands out in my mind right now is that I heard time and time again is one of the most powerful aspects of the community was you could show up as you are and feel accepted.
I mean, I practiced there and I can agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, and I started practicing there in 2009, and my yoga practice ebbed and flowed, and I was a on and off practitioner. Went as like a warm up for my dance classes. I went more so for the physicality, wanted to sweat it out, get off those last 5 pounds before a dance project or whatever. And um, and when it really started to land, it was after I had my daughter, and I was in the midst of, I had gone back to dancing, and I was doing a dance project, and a lot of things were transitioning in my life at the time. And I distinctly remember being in like supine twist. It was like an 8 a.m. class with like Liz Smoen or Heather Cause was one of the two. And I remember one of them saying something just so profound. And at least in the moment it felt profound. And it was just like, but I heard it. And it not only like, I didn't only hear it, it landed in my body. Right? It was the first time like the practice, like it's like, another layer of myself had opened up, and I was able to receive it in such a different way that I was like, oh my gosh, I have not been listening to what this practice is. And then life continued to happen. Amelia's father and I separated. I was a stay-at-home mom doing dance projects here and there, didn't have a job, needed a job. Several of my dance friends worked at Yoga One, and they were like, come interview. So I started working the front desk, and then, my practice picked up, and then I was like, I want to be an assistant, like hands-on assisting, empowering people's practices in that way, because being a teacher was like, I was like, you have got to be someone special to be a teacher. And
Look at you now, and look at you now.
right, well, thank you. And I was like, oh, and like the physicality of like being able to support a teacher in that way and to support students in the hands-on assist, that felt like, and it still does feel like a very a calling that I have, and that I love to utilize. And so I became an assistant, and then finally went to Costa Rica, was like, I'm going to lead yoga retreats, but I wasn't a yoga teacher yet. And like came home and signed up for teacher training. And so anyway, so 2016, I did my teacher training there. Began teaching prenatal yoga, created a mommy and mini class, uh, started helping in development of the kids yoga classes and program there. And, just kept evolving, right? And so then the pandemic hit. I had just come back from a Costa Rica retreat in February 2020. We came home. March circled around. It was like March 13th or 15th, something like that. And it was a Monday, and I was teaching a deep stretch class, and we had received word that Yoga One would be closing their doors for 2 to 3 weeks. That was the last time I taught in there. So weird. I remember walking up and
Because
down
it was
those.
pretty sudden,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like it happened very suddenly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was, COVID had started, and we were trying to navigate, how do we show up in classroom? It was a hot yoga studio. So people are sweating. I mean, we literally would set our mats up like, an inch, 2 inches apart, and anywhere from 30 to 70 people would show up at a time to practice there. And, it was a powerful community. that created space and opportunity and love and connection. I mean, I was, walking up and down that long hallway to all the studios. Like, I had some of the most deepest life conversations, sometimes with strangers, students that came to my class for the first time. And then those students became my friends, and like those friends became like chosen family, and some uh, of those students then became people I took teacher training with, or um, led kids yoga camps with, or it's just like our lives began to um, weave together, and we just, it's kind of sometimes like a bubble, of like, and it was just positive, right? And I was like, and we were like, oh, we don't ever know. Like, I remember saying, like, oh gosh, are we, like, how long is this going to be? But we went home and we did a full online schedule from like 6 in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. I kept teaching in the same way I showed up at the studio. Sometimes, 15 to 20 classes a week. I guess it lessened a bit. Um, and then, gosh, was it June 24th, 22nd, something around that time? We were still teaching online classes. I was teaching many workshops, and we were just like brainstorming and coming up with ways to keep community together, right? Um, Through a time that was so isolating for so many. And I taught a 9:30 class, just like I always did. And at noon, we received a letter saying that um, the 7 p.m. class would be the last Yoga One class ever.
Oh my God. So like from the morning to the night, that was it.
That was
Was done.
it. And then I remember, like, there was a band of us that, teachers, students, friends, just through the community. Our good friend Ian was teaching the 545, and we were like, we're going to go practice in his driveway. And so we showed up at Ian's house, and there were probably about 15 of us. We knew that there was too many in one space, but we were outside, so we spread out in his driveway, and we streamed it. Ian was like shocked that we all showed up at his house. He was like, I think I need to stay like present to like what I'm teaching, and so he stayed inside, but we practiced outside, um and then Nishay taught the 7 p.m. and we kept that streaming, um, while we all stayed there, and then it was gone. So there was like, this, I'll speak for me. It was shocking. I was angry. I was, um, there is a bit of desperation because it was my full time. I had made it my full time job, for the most part, to be outside of, in the ways in which I was dancing, um, to be there, and
So you're losing, I mean, obviously, so one thing I've just thought about while you were talking is, I mean, you would walk, at least for me, I would walk, again, I'll speak for myself, but I would walk in those doors and the energy was palpable. Like to your point, you could tell people felt safe there to like be themselves. There was a sense of love, openness, like honesty, integrity. Well, among, at least among the people, that worked there, you could like, there was just like an authenticity. Um, so not only are you losing like the human beings in the community that you worked with there and taught to, you're losing that energy that you would enter into the space. Like you said, you would have the deepest conversations with people, and you're also losing your job. I mean, like all of those things I mean, literally in one day. I mean,
in
it's intense.
hours. Yeah,
Yeah, that is very intense.
it was intense. to say the least. And I think, like, I mean, for me, there was this sense of urgency of like, what do we do? Like, we can't let this go. We can't let this energy go. And like, and also, it wasn't, perfect. There were tons of ways in which we were all growing as a studio individually. And it was like, what can we do and how do we do better? Right. And so there was a core of teachers who wanted to continue teaching. We created the Yes Collective. Um, Ian and I, came together and spearheaded, the Yes Collective and continued a similar schedule for almost a year. That was all online. Um, it allowed people, teachers to choose when they were going to teach. We just kind of crafted a schedule that people could tap into, that we posted on a daily basis. Um, People paid teachers directly, and people were so generous, like beyond generous. I mean, people would, it was pay what you can, maybe like suggested $10 or something like that. And people went well above and beyond. And, there were times some students were like $50 just because I love you. And I know you need this right now. And that was, you know, it was a sense of hope, of not even being on the receiving side, but just hearing when some teachers had that experience, of that, like, oh my gosh, we're still in it together. And like, and when you create something so intentional and so beautiful, um, like that continues, right? So there was like that sense of loss, and I took it as an opportunity to discover how I would keep that legacy moving forward, right? And it helped me in ways of like, and not that I have the answer even now. And I can see how sometimes the like umbrella, it was a platform, right? It was a foundation, but there also felt like there was a roof over the top that kind of kept my wings only so wide, right? And so there like was an unique opportunity, I think, that we all have. I won't speak for everyone, and I will speak for myself, that like, oh, this was like mama bird pushing the baby bird out of the nest. Like, go fly. Like, you have what you need. And I haven't found one place that is like, yeah, I mean, and there never will be the same. It never
There's
will.
not, yeah, there's
It
not
never
going to
will
be,
be.
well, and it's like we just talked about, like when you have a dance group doing one performance, like there's never going to be that exact set of people doing that exact routine or whatever, right? So there's never going to be that same space, community, like it's not going to be exactly the same. Um, and I think it's very cool and admirable that, I mean, I know obviously you were like deeply shocked and deeply saddened in the beginning with the fact that you're able to like, you were practicing what we're preaching now by being able to like see the possibility in such a loss and like, okay, like now I can spread my wings maybe in a different way than I ever have before. Like it's a challenge. I'm sure it was very challenging. But it's kind of, I mean, this could probably be a whole nother topic for another episode, but I think so many, the pandemic, for obvious reasons, there's like the term everyone's like, we had to pivot, we had to pivot. Um, so many people had that challenge then, I think. Like things, I mean, obviously there was a lot of actual death and people were losing human beings, which is, so I don't want to like glorify the pandemic in any way. And so many businesses people, industries, whatever, had to, like, we were forced to change and grow in ways maybe we didn't even know we could because we had to, right? Like, we were forced to kind of, like you said, we're pushed out of the nest. I'm like, I guess I'm gonna fly. I don't know. Like,
I could fall, oh my
um,
dear, or you could fly, right? Like it is that, and maybe we fly and just a little and fall, right? Like it's a continuous, it's like in like your leadership, fail fast, right? And I came to that understanding in at Yoga One, right? And when I became a teacher and we would have teacher meetings, right? And it would always be like some kind of leadership. And I distinctly remember doing an exercise and we had to pass or fail people. I could easily pass anyone, right? But telling someone that they failed was so difficult for me, right? Because like I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to fail. And like I had such a weighted meaning on what failure was, right? Where it took refiling the word failure to say that is an opportunity to grow. And the quicker you fail, the quicker you grow, right? So it's part of that mindset of like exercising uh that muscle, right? To learn how to recover, right? And you have, it's like babies learning to walk. They learn to stand up and catch balance before they ever take a step, right? And they do try to skip the step, right? Because they're seeing people walk around them constantly. And so they know that that's where they have to get to, yet they're going to fall first, right? But they don't stop trying. And I think, we're conditioned as we get older to be scared, to be scared of falling and failing, like and that, and then in that practice, right, of being able to pass or fail someone, and it was simply not because of who they are or how they were teaching, it was because it was my experience, right? So being able to detach the word from making it mean something about that person, right? And then being able to say fail became fun, right? And I also was able to receive it of like, oh, that's their experience, and okay, how can I do this differently for it to land in their body? Like that was that's the growing edge, that's closing the gap, so that then the practice becomes more accessible for everyone. The way that I teach becomes more accessible for everyone. um and and those are the lessons that like I have to continue, and I don't have to, it's been a constant choice to continue to do and to put into practice time and time again in my parenting, in what I'm doing in my career, and the choices that I'm making in my relationships, or day to day, like how I eat. Like it is a choice to like, you know, to stay in this ebb and flow of of living the boldest life. And I think that's one of the things that, again, why we're here, right? Because these experiences of loss have taught us how to be fully present and to be living our best life moment to moment, no matter what happens.
absolutely.
Yeah, because I had that loss, and then my mom turned around and died. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Like, and
A doozy.
right.
Those are
And
some doozies.
and all of these lessons, and I had other things. I was teaching for movement migration. We had an amazing program um, online. I taught point in my classroom to students in Italy and France and the United Kingdom, and and all over the United States, improv classes, uh, all a variety ballet, all a variety of classes in my kitchen. Um, so it's not like that's the only thing I was doing. And, that yoga one was they gave me tools that are just irreplaceable, right? That are tools that I have been able to take into so many other facets that gave me the tools to like feel this sense of urgency. And it has, even 4 years later, right? We're coming up on the anniversary of Yoga One closing. And it has been so refreshing that as, you know, my practice still evolves, my teaching evolves, where I'm showing up to teaching evolves, um, how I'm creating community in the way of this yoga channel. I have had the experience in the last month or two of being grocery shopping, at a concert, um, selling flowers, of people being like, "Gosh, you look so familiar." I'm like, "Mm, okay, yeah." And I'm like, "Well, I've been in Charlotte for a long time, so there's that." And then all of a sudden we'll start talking, and then it's like, "Yoga One." And I'm like, "Yep, Yoga One." And then we have this beautiful, sometimes bittersweet, but it's always beautiful connection of the magic that existed. And it's such a sweet reminder that, like, we're all, for the most part, we're here, right? We're still here, and we have a choice with like how we continue to create that connection and breathe life into that legacy we were given.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like all the lessons that you say you've taken into all these other facets of your life. It's the same when we lose our humans, right? Like we don't forget them. Whatever our experiences were with them is taken with us going forward. Like they make up the part of the fabric of who we are. So just because we've lost them, like that, whatever we learned from them or whatever connections there were, the memories, like they come with us, that we bring them along, just like the lessons of loss of community. Like you've brought whatever you learned from Yoga One along in the future, and um, it doesn't go away. Like all of these experiences make us who we are.
Absolutely. And that's a like, it was so powerful that, like, even after Yoga One closed and my mom passed suddenly, how that community continued to show up for me, right? From like the moment people found out she was in the hospital, to the moment that she passed, to months later, like from food to notes to people dropping off books at my apartment door, um just just a huge, overwhelming sense of support. And I have no doubt, I mean, at least I know that if someone from that community were to reach out to me, even after all of this time, and ask for help, and if I, in some way, shape, or form, I would be a complete yes for it. No doubt in my mind. And that, and it continues to, and I think that's the thing. It's like, I think that's the grief over it, right? Like, some people may be angry that it closed still, or how it happened. And like, we can't go back and change those things. We can't control that. It's like we waste so much energy having, um, and then we cultivate negativity in our lives when we're focused on the constant weight of it all. And like on the other side, it's like, oh, wait, hey, like, it's not going to be the same. But if we're all still there, then that sense of community kind of does still exist. And it may take work to find it. It might not just be like walking into the brick and mortar and being immersed in a community that is like that. And I guarantee you it's out there, right? There are those like-minded people out there doing the thing. And so yeah, like maybe it's the perception, right? And then I think that's the above the line is forgiveness. Right? We have to forgive that it's no longer here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then look for those like glimmers of that same community. Like, how can we build it elsewhere? And like, maybe not replicate it exactly, but how are we bringing that energy and sense to our lives in other ways?
And I think that's an important thing in conversation to have with kids of like moving to high school or middle school or whatever it is. Like, it's like what is the intention in which you want to create? What is the community that you want to create around you? What is and there are that's a hard thing for kids to realize, that like there are going to be kids that are not going to have their best interest or have integrity in how they like or like thrive off of gossip or drama, right? And to teach our children, well, you have a choice to be a part of the solution or a part of the problem, right? Or and inviting like what you want into your life. And I think that's those are all part of the transitions and the things that are I think that sometimes they're more important than math.
Yeah, like how are we being intentional with the community we're surrounding ourselves with? Like it is a choice. Like you are part of, you become, I know it's a cliche, but like you are the people you hang out with. So like, how are you being intentional in creating that energy and surrounding
Yeah.
yourself with that?
And it's also like, the practice of non-attachment, right? Because everything is constantly evolving and things are always changing. That's a guarantee, right? So when it does, how do we move forward out of that? Right? It's just, it just keeps coming back to that choice, right? Of like, let go and let God, if you will, or let go and let your source guide you. Let your intuition guide you. Let, honor what was, to be able to create your world. Thank you for joining us on the Morning Call podcast.
We're excited to continue this conversation around loss of community and other types of loss. Stay tuned as we invite guests to share their own experiences of loss with the Morning Call community.
Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.